Welcome to the IVM Podcast Network.
The OnCourse podcast is an IVM production. And if you like this show, check out Geek Fruit for in-depth conversations about pop culture, science fiction, and overall nerd culture. You don't want to miss this.
You're listening to the OnCourse podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome to the OnCourse podcast. OnCourse is a creative and alternate education company that aims to bridge the gap between formal classroom education and real-world skills. We offer a range of programs from short skill-based courses to test prep to application assistance for those who are looking to study abroad. My name is Alisha Mashruwala. I'm the CEO and co-founder at OnCourse. And today I have with me Jharna Sheth in the studio. Hi, Jharna.
Hi, Alisha. How are you?
Great, thanks. So Jharna is the MBA head at OnCourse. And I think what we're going to talk about today is generally, studying economics in college and careers that you can kind of follow if you do study economics in college. So just very simply to start, Jharna, what exactly do you study when you study economics at an undergraduate level?
Sure. So at an undergraduate level, obviously through your 3 years or 4 years of undergrad, you study a range of subjects. And obviously, depending on the university you're at, you get a chance to study other subjects alongside economics as well. Now, within economics, you start off with a focus on micro and macroeconomics, which is really the fundamental, disciplines within economics that you need to sort of have an understanding of before you start diving deep. Now, when one says microeconomics, it's simply sort of economics of an individual or of a firm or of a household, right? So at a very, very basic level, how do people interact or how does one person make his or her economic decisions? And when you aggregate that, really, you probably have what is called as macroeconomics, which is really how a society functions or how an economy functions or how a state functions. It's almost like stacking individuals or stacking households on top of each other to create a larger entity, which will give you macroeconomics. So really, it's a study of the behavior of individuals and societies, purely in economic sense, on how they make rational decisions, to kind of carry on their business or, sort of make decisions in life. So that's what you study within micro and macroeconomics. And that's something which, anybody who's studying economics will have to cover at some level when they start off. Post which you can, start studying more specific areas of economics depending on your interest. And this again depends on the university or the college you're at and the kind of facilities or the electives that they offer.
So you studied economics and statistics at Xavier's.
Correct.
So what exactly did you cover in economics and statistics? And did you feel like the two complemented each other well as subjects?
No, absolutely. In fact, for most parts, right, whether you study economics or statistics both or, pick economics by itself, you will still have to do a lot of math within economics. And that's the direction that economics as a discipline is taking in the current days, right? So back in the day, economics used to be more theoretical and less quantitative in its nature. And now there's a lot of focus on quantitative methods within economics because at the end of the day, you want data backing what you're claiming, right? So being able to use math and statistics with economics is what, most researchers are doing currently and most companies or corporates are even looking at. So having a knowledge of statistics or math will always help. So in many ways, the degree complemented each other. That said, if you don't have the option to study statistics at the university or at the college you're at, it's always good to take a few classes in statistics or quantitative methods or math, depending on what is available. Because at the end of the day, the two will mesh together to really help you develop that niche within economics that you want.
And I guess with most colleges, if the economics program is fairly quant heavy, then they will have requirements for you to fulfill.
Correct.
As well.
So the core requirements will always exist and that's true of most programs, right? So even if you did a pure economics program at St. Xavier's, for instance, you would still have to take a few math classes within it. That said, for your electives, you have the option to pick, something more theoretical if that's what you are interested in. Let's say if you are interested in something like international trade because, let's say you're someone who wants to go down corporate finance eventually. So you may want to get an understanding of how trade functions between countries and that's an elective you want to pick. That's great. Alternatively, if you're someone who wants to get into research more in depth, then I would recommend taking a few more math classes because that will help you develop the rigor that you will need eventually to kind of come up with those research papers, which are, again, quantitative in nature.
So when you were at Xavier's, what were the electives that you took and what was kind of the area of economics that you enjoyed studying there?
So unfortunately, because I picked a double major, I didn't have the luxury of taking too many electives because I had core requirements for both economics and statistics. That said, the range of electives that Xavier's offered, for instance, it ranged from, like I said, international trade to development economics, which is what I eventually did my master's in, and also quantitative methods. At the same time, there was also an option to study exports. So really being able to sort of understand how all of these work. So, you could pick from any of these. You also had sometimes an option to study a few classes in law, because again, if you were someone who wanted to go down policy, having an understanding of law would also help. So these are some of the range of electives that Xavier's offered. I couldn't take advantage of far too many of those because of my stats requirements.
So you mentioned you did your master's more in developmental economics. So
Correct.
you did your master's at Oxford.
Correct.
So how is the experience at Oxford in terms of courses that you took very different from Xavier's?
In many ways, it was an extension, I would say, because at the end of the day, any master's program will build on, the undergrad knowledge you have. That said, a lot of times people do pursue a master's in a field that they haven't ever studied before. So, in the first few classes, you will always have a revision, for want of a better word, of what you've already studied. But, at the end of the day, economics is economics no matter where you study it. So it's not very different. What I would say is different is the approach that I would have taken at both places, right? So at Xavier's, even though, like I said, there is a focus on quantitative economics, and like I said, I did a double major with stats, the econ that I studied was still very theoretical. Whereas at Oxford, even the economics I studied was very, very quant heavy. So even when you studied, a simple, firm and household model, you would still use a lot of math or a lot of, sort of differentiation, integration, and a lot of sort of derivatives within those basic models to understand how firms behave, which is something we never did at undergrad in Xavier's.
And at Oxford, so you did a dissertation. So what was your dissertation on?
So my dissertation was basically on migration patterns, and that's again an extension of what I did at the undergrad as well. So I was fortunate to have the luxury of pursuing both my theses in the same topic. At least in the same area of work, is something that I'm very, very keen to sort of understand, and have been pursuing for a while now. Is basically sort of understanding how migration decisions are economic in nature. So the one that I did at Oxford was basically looking at cyclones and any kind of natural disasters and how they impact migration patterns in these drought-prone areas or cyclone-prone areas, and how are they economic in nature or not.
That's really interesting. And so kind of talking about, your experience in both places. At Oxford, what was one of your favorite electives that you took, or a favorite professor if you had one?
Sure. So I'm going to name one professor who I found very, very interesting was Christopher Adam. He was the head of department at Oxford as well for the course that I was studying. What was interesting about him was the kind of work he was doing in East Africa. So basically he was studying a lot of economies in Africa, and a lot of his research was live. So, a lot of the classes we took in macroeconomics really, were based on live research. So it was not something which was a paper that was dated and written back in the 1900s or 2000, early 2000s or whatever, right? So it was very, very live. And, oftentimes, a lot of the discussions would be based on what he was currently researching, and he would take that back to the field and come back with his findings. So it was almost like we were participating in his research while we were studying.
I guess that's an opportunity that, most programs abroad gives you, which
Correct.
is kind of having the top professors teaching you, or people who are doing some very interesting research as
Right.
well. Great. So we're in conversation with Jharna. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the careers in economics.
Every week comes a show where three people come together to tell you about stuff they like. A movie, a TV show, a book, and other stuff. Tune in every Monday on the IVM Podcast app to IVM Likes. Batman approves this message. Thank you, Batman.
We're back in conversation with Jharna, where she was just telling us a little bit about her experience at Oxford and studying economics at Oxford. So after having studied economics, I'm sure a lot of the listeners are interested to know, what are the potential areas or careers that you can get into, or what are the fields you can get into when you've done a degree?
So I think the most organic extension of an undergrad or master's in economics would be research in that area, right? So a lot of people who are, interested in like I said, exploring certain areas of work, or, have a passionate, interest in, say, like I said, migration, would probably go down research in those areas. So they would essentially come up with a thesis statement and, find a guide and, seek mentorship and seek, funding for research and pursue the doctoral studies in that particular area. So that's one sort of most obvious way of moving forward. That said, not all people who pursue a PhD will end up becoming academics, right? So, some of them will be, and they would probably go on to take on positions positions as professors or as teachers in universities or colleges, globally. That said, a lot of people who will pursue these PhD programs will still be absorbed into the, into the formal economic sectors, like whether you're a corporate company or you're, a think tank or any of that, right? So because a lot of these organizations would also need someone who has keen expertise in a particular area and then would want to tap into that knowledge bank to sort of further their internal research or, come up with policy or come up with, say, economic models that would guide, their further work. So, just giving you an example of someone who kind of worked in sort of creating catastrophe bonds. So, something which is not very commonly heard of in India, for instance, is, and very common, not very common, but getting more and more rampant in European economies is being able to create bonds that will, hedge you against catastrophic events, right? And when I say catastrophic events, it's not only natural disasters, but even terrorist attacks, for instance, which is something which is a, growing concern now. So, being able to create economic models of how that will happen, when that will happen, and what you should be doing is one area where a lot of economists are being absorbed, for instance, in the corporate sector as well. So that's the sort of most organic, right? That said, economics is a very, very broad-based field, right? And has applications, across a range of disciplines and professions. So, you could still go down the conventional finance route as well, because again, at the end of the day, the skills you need for finance are basically quantitative economics and being able to, understand models well and being able to really predict, how people behave, because at the end of the day, a lot of how equity markets work is basically on crowd psychology. And, again, coming back to the economic principles of rational thinking and, whether people are thinking rationally or not. So, economics and finance are very interlinked. And for instance, Oxford also offers a program in financial economics specifically for people who are, interested in building a career in finance and also are interested in economics at the same time. So that's the second route. The third is consulting, which is, again, a very commonly charted path, a path which I took personally, where you would work with, agencies to kind of come up with economic policies. Now, these agencies could be multilateral agencies which are government funded, let's say, like the UN or the World Bank or the ADB, working in tandem with state governments or central governments globally, and coming up with policy around how economies can develop, because at the end of the day, you want to pull people out of poverty and, being able to come up with the right use of the money is important as opposed to kind of losing a lot of money in the value chain. So that's another route. Strategy consulting also ends up being an option because at the end of the day, like I said, the skills are still very, very quant heavy. And again, based on being able to understand human behavior, which is, a skill which is very, very potent for strategy consulting as well. So all of these routes remain open. And again, like I said, I'm now in education, right? So that doesn't preclude anyone from moving out and using that knowledge to move out and work in an entrepreneurial space as well.
So it's a very dynamic degree. I guess
Correct.
You can do a lot with it as well. So you mentioned your journey was a little bit more on the consulting side.
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about post-Oxford. I think you did study law as well.
Yes.
And then moved into the consulting space. So how was that experience?
So I think, when you want to work in policy, having an understanding of law always helps because at the end of the day, you are working a lot with policy documents and being able to understand how this will, sort of play out in the legal dynamic space, right? So, ramifications of this are multifold, right? At the end of the day, you can't make a policy in silo based on what you want to decide. There will always be legal implications of what you're suggesting. So, having that, knowledge of law to some extent will definitely help. That said, it's not a requirement, right? So, because I had the luxury of time, I could pursue the degree in law in parallel and sort of, then move into policy. So, I worked with Ernst & Young for a short period of time where we worked with state governments to help formulate policies around help state governments and central governments come up with policies around skill development, for instance, which is a thrust area for the current government as well. We worked on policies for micro and small medium enterprises, which are again, a thrust area given the fact that we're trying to push a lot of people into the formal economy. We also worked on policies for food processing, which are again, very important for India now that we're trying to sort of integrate supply chains across the country, and we don't have a cold chain network across the country yet. So if you read the debates around sort of Bharti and Walmart and all of that, it's a large part of what governments are trying to push, that you need to have all these food chains because otherwise there's no circulation and no logistics to help help the supply chain in India. So a lot of the work we did was around policies for these kinds of initiatives that governments were taking. But again, some of these are independent white papers, which an organization like EY is publishing, just to kind of create a policy and a dialogue in that direction. And some would be really working in conjunction with the government to help them formulate policies that they are, wanting to push, where a consultant would really benchmark against the global best practices, right? So let's say, France has a policy around this, for example. Then what is France doing right? Or let's say Germany has a policy around this. What is Germany doing right? And what could we borrow from those, and what can be carried to India and what can't be given the Indian context.
That's very interesting, and I think your journey has also been very unique and, great in a way. So in terms of, there are a lot of kids listening to this podcast,
Sure.
a lot of parents, a lot of, older people figuring out what they want to do with their career. What are some of the skills you feel like, or what is the knowledge you need to kind of be successful or, have that kind of skill for studying economics?
So I think one is definitely a knack for math. And again, when I say math, I don't mean that you need to be, as good as math as someone who's applying for engineering needs to be. That said, an interest in math will definitely help, or at least lack of aversion for math, for want of a better word, right? Because a lot of people are just scared of it. So at least be open to doing some amount of math. Something which I think I probably goofed up a little bit. So, post my 10th grade, I dropped math for 2 years because I was just, I wasn't bad at it. I was just scared of it, right? And post 12th grade, I realized that if I want to pursue economics, I should probably do something about it, which is why I took up stats again. So that I pushed myself, and it was a struggle for me, right? Because for everybody else in class, they had done 2 years of maths between 11th and 12th, which I completely had missed out on. So I had to pick up on all of that and then build on what I was doing in the 11th in undergrad degree as well. So I think definitely, keep in touch with math. So, if you are scared of it, then maybe, you need to do something about it, because otherwise a career in economics seems unlikely. Because at some point you will have to cross paths with math. So if you can't make your peace with it, then, there's something to worry about. Second is, I think, a knowledge of economics per se is not a requirement to apply to any of these programs. So you needn't have taken economics to study economics at undergrad. That said, if you've done it, you will know whether you enjoy it a little bit. But again, to be very honest, it's a function of the kind of teachers you get. So sometimes, if your teacher is someone who's making it very, very mundane and theoretical, you may start hating the subject. So my advice to any young learner who's interested in economics or feels like they may be interested in economics is try and, probably go online, and, there's so many massive online open courses like MOOCs on Coursera or edX. Try and find one of the best, because, let's say like a Jeffrey Sachs course or, Paul Collier course, some of the, the stalwarts and the better speakers in economics, to see if you enjoy those classes. Because if you enjoy those, then you probably will get the knack of economics when you have to. And maybe take a judgment call based on that and not on the basis of what you're studying in class.
I think that's great. And I think it is very important for, anyone who is potentially even considering it to just keep abreast with current affairs.
Correct.
And make sure they kind of know what's going on and
Absolutely.
how economics impacts other aspects of the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thanks so much, Charna. It was great having you in studio today. Thanks
Thank
everyone
you.
for listening. And if you want to learn more, if you want to know more about economics and careers in economics, you can write to us at info@oncourseglobal.com. You could visit our website www.oncourseglobal.com or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Sorry to say, but there's been a slight delay due to the apocalypse having suddenly begun. As you can see, there's death, destruction, and chaos taking place all around us. But don't you worry, food and drinks will be served shortly, and I would recommend checking out
IVM Podcasts
to get some of your favorite Indian podcasts. We'll keep you going till this whole thing blows over. Thank you.